All right, I'm joined by Hal Shurtleff. He is a longtime conservative activist in the greater Boston area. He is the director of Camp Constitution. Hal, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Well, thanks for having me on, and Happy New Year to you and all of your millions of viewers and listeners all over the world.
Thanks a lot, Hal. This is all right. I mean, I will tell you, this is a new experiment for me doing the split screen here live at YouTube. And if I can get this thing down, then I could talk to anybody in the world, right?
Yeah, I would think so. What you need is a 13-year-old daughter like I have to help me out with the technology.
Oh, okay. Well, sure.
It's great technology.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that generation, they understand this stuff like it's a second language. Hal, let's talk a little bit about Camp Constitution. Before we get into the actual content of it, I want you to talk about the nuts and bolts of what Camp Constitution is and how it happens.
Well, we were founded. I'm the co-founder and full-time director. I became the full-time director this February of last year, and it was founded in 2008 when another camp program that had a national presence was canceled, and our camp in the Northeast, we thought, hey, this is a vibrant program. We need to keep it going. So with the help of Mr. Charlie Everett, who now lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Mrs. Ruth Harper, retired school teacher from Grand Rapids, we put together this Camp Constitution. And we're chartered in New Hampshire as a charitable trust, although we like to say we have an online presence and an internet presence, and so we really have people from all over the world have been contacting us. We started off with a summer camp, a week-long family summer camp for families and unaccompanied minors and adults. And the purpose of the camp is to teach the principles of what made our nation great, the U.S. Constitution. Here we hold it up here. This is the one we distribute these all over the place on a regular basis. And the problems facing our country and what to do about it. Now, our motto pretty sums up our agenda. It's honoring the past, teaching the present, preparing the future. And not only are we, and our goal is to make future freedom activists, but also the current ones, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s or 50s, make them more effective. And so we started our first camp, and then we realized that there were some materials that had been out of print that we should make available. So we started Camp Constitution Press, and we've actually published a few books, and we put all the books in print, as well as pamphlets and brochures. And then, we have a Facebook page, a YouTube channel. And our YouTube channel, now we don't have 1 million subscribers yet. We're still got a ways to go. But we're getting about 1,000 views a day, which I think is pretty good, considering that what they're watching is, I think, a very important content. A lot of our classes over the years, things we do year-round. So we have something called Camp Constitution Media. We go to events and videotape them. We have a speakers bureau. And if you go to our website, campconstitution.net, you can see the wide array of speakers. And last year we had presentations from Grand Rapids to Presque Isle, Maine. So pretty much all over the Northeast and a little bit of the Midwest. And we're branching out all the time.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the experience of being at Camp Constitution for a young person enrolled at the camp. I mean, it's a combination of your traditional camp with it's on a lake and there's fun things to do and there's sports, but there's also daily classes.
That's right.
Where you study things like the monetary system and the Constitution.
That's right.
and
well, it's unique because in the middle. What's interesting is that when you tell a young person, oh, you want to come to this wonderful camp where you learn stuff and you have classes in the summertime, they look at you like, what, is this punishment?
Right.
But it isn't quite that way. We have things that you'll find in a typical camp, the canoeing and the hiking and fishing and all that good stuff, campfire. But we have a series of classes. We have a very tight schedule, too. And our classes are designed for little ones, from something called the Patriot Camp, where they learn about our nation, some of our historical events, dress up in costumes. We've got little toy muskets and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of fun. Then we have for the junior high, high school, and really up to postgraduate when you think about it. And we have some of the great instructors, some of the best people in the field. For example, Mrs. Chris Ann Hall, who's a constitutional attorney. She travels all over the country, pretty much as her ministry, and she does great classes on the Constitution, on the Declaration of Independence, and different topics. We don't want to have the same class taught by the same person every year. Dr. Duke Pesta is coming to our camp this year.
Excellent.
Dr. Duke Pesta is you've had him on your show in the past. He is the nation's foremost expert exposing Common Core. Professor Willie Soon, who's an atmospheric scientist out of the Harvard Smithsonian, he was at our camp last year with his whole family, being a family camp, and they had a great time, and he's coming back. In fact, Willie Soon's influence, he's pretty well known around the world, and he's a good friend of Lord Christopher Monckton, whom I actually know. I met him, but as a result of Willie's influence, he's coming to camp this year as well. And then we've had people like, over the years, Tom DeWeese with the American Policy Center. We've had, let's see, what other great celebrity speakers we've had. We had Larry Pratt of Gun Owners of America. He was there last year. Right. Alex Newman. Yep. Alex is an incredible, writes for WorldNet Daily, The New American, and he was there at last year's camp. In fact, he's so dedicated. He flew in on a Saturday. He had to be home by Monday night. And he came in and taught a class and went home, but he's so glad that he came just for that short time.
Yeah, and he's, by the way, just to interject, he's the co-author with the late Dr. Samuel L. Blumenfeld of Crimes of the Educators.
That's right. That's right, which is an important book.
Yes.
And what's fascinating is that they didn't meet each other. The book had been published, and they didn't even know each other. It was just through Skype and emails and phone calls. But I was very pleased that I was able to get them to actually meet before Sam's passing.
Yeah.
And, of course, you had a chance to meet Alex. I think you did. You came to that event.
Yep.
Yeah.
And basically, what you're doing is extremely important work because young people are not really learning about the actual Constitution of the United States, which, of course, is what our government is. We're a self-governing people. That's the basis of our laws. And, but, it may sound incredible to some people watching, but our school system isn't actually teaching young people the Constitution, how our government works. We have public officials who take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution, but yet they don't know what's in it. And, young people really have no idea. They haven't actually sat down and even looked at a Constitution. You're not going to find copies of the Constitution all that readily available in public schools. And the irony is that a young person, a teenager, can pick up a Constitution and read it and understand it. It is written in clear, simple language. It means what it says. It's and yet young people aren't being exposed to it. So what you're doing is actually quite conventional. It should be seen as what schools should do on a regular basis. It's civics, really. It's like a civics class, and there's none of that in our public schools. So, young people going to your camp. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually, it's not just young people. It's people our age and older and younger. We actually we'll do information tables at various events, gun shows, homeschool shows, even places like Boston Common. And it's fascinating in Boston Common because you get people from all over the country. It's not just people in the neighborhood. We have a little 10-question quiz that we offer, a couple of trick questions in there. But we ask questions like, what amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms? Who declares war? What branch of government does this or that? And you'd be shocked to see how very few, even adults, know much about the Constitution, how many amendments we have. So there are some basic things they don't understand. Then you ask things like, who's your member of Congress? Who are your 2 U.S. senators? And then you're really going to have trouble getting any response. So it's not just the young people. The other thing, too, is that if they are getting something in a public school, if they are learning about the Constitution, they're learning things like, well, it's an obsolete document written by Eurocentric, slave-owning white males, and it's an outdated Constitution, and it really needs to be revised or rewritten.
Right.
So having a Constitution in your possession is good. It's just like having a Bible. You can have all the Bibles in your room or in your library, but if you don't read them and understand them, then it really doesn't have much of an impact. So we like to think that our camp offers a potential life-changing, definitely life-affirming experience. So they're getting a lot of material that they can use in their circles, that they can use to influence others. I'll give you an example. One of our young campers, he lives in Manchester, New Hampshire, and he does attend public school. But he was actually able to get his teacher to show a videotape that we make available. And I just got a call from his dad, who's now he's now a school committee member, and they want an organization to donate 1,000 grade in Manchester public schools. Well, guess what? We're going to do that. And we actually spoke to a public school in Connecticut a few years ago. I had about 400 students, I think it was 4th and 5th grade, 2 classes. And I had their parents there and some teachers, and it was a great time. And we discovered that even the teachers didn't know much about the Constitution. Only one adult in the class knew who the member of Congress was that represented that district. So there's glaring ignorance about the Constitution, and it's not just you go to a gun show, you figure, okay, everybody there knows what the Second Amendment is, but do they really have a clear understanding of it? And on the quiz, they'll get that one right. Question number 1, which amendment protects, not gives, but protects the right to bear arms? That goes downhill from there. But our presence there isn't to make people feel dumb or, like some of these man on the street interviews. That's not our purpose is to teach people. That's what we're set up to do. So it's something we do year round, not just at one week camp. Although our mission is to expand the camp program. I was out in Michigan, in Ohio just last month, and we spoke to homeschool groups and a few other type of patriotic type groups, and we have a really strong interest in studying a camp out there. We're trying to get a camp in southern New Jersey. It's all about the funding. I mean, if we had we barely get our chin over the bar, so to speak. And what I think we do is so important that people can be able to help us with our important work.
And it sounds like you're doing some amazing things in terms of doing outreach to public schools. What the program that you're developing should be really at least a one-day seminar at all public schools, where people could go to an auditorium and actually get some instruction with regard to how the government works. Most people have no idea what the 3 branches of government are, who their representatives are, what congressmen do. In fact, I've discovered, in my own experience, that a lot of congressmen have no idea the actual responsibilities and powers of a representative, what they can do and what they can't do or what they shouldn't do based on the Constitution, not to mention what judges, what is the proper role of the judiciary and all of these things. People really have no idea. It's all become distorted. You mentioned earlier the Common Core. You have Dr. Duke Pesto, who's one of the nation's experts on the Common Core. I've had a little chance to study this, and the Common Core, part of the curriculum, they actually offer an analysis of the Constitution, which changes it. They don't even give the student the language of the Constitution. They sort of interpret several of the amendments, particularly the Second Amendment, to fit their own agenda that has nothing to do with the actual Constitution itself. So, what you're doing is quite simple. You're simply bringing into the classroom, you're making the citizen aware of what the actual laws of our land are. And yet, what you're doing in many quarters is controversial for reasons that we can certainly discuss. I think we understand that. And the counter is, look, you're teaching the Constitution to young people so they can understand the nature of our government. Because if we don't do that, then we're not going to have a Constitution.
Well, it's interesting when people will say, I ask this question, where do you find the job description of the President of the United States during the last presidential election? I asked this question, and people look at me like they scratch their heads. Well, gee, I don't know. And I say, the New York Times? The Oprah Winfrey Show? Is that where you find it? No. You find it in Article 2 of the Constitution. And the president, his job description isn't the most powerful man in the free world. His job description's laid out, and he's got powers and duties, and that's that. He's got a lot. I mean, he can sign a bill into law, although that can be overridden by 2/3. He can appoint ambassadors and other folks, but then the Senate has to concur. So there's a lot of checks and balances there. Well, what's a congressman's job? Article 1, member of the House of Representatives. That's where the power is. They have about 30 powers and duties, and it's pretty awesome. They can raise taxes. They declare war. On our 10-question quiz, we ask people, who declares war? And most people think the president does. Well, our founders did not want one person to declare war. That's an awesome power that should be used very infrequently. And then you ask the follow-up question. When was the last time the United States declared war? And they'll say, oh, well, was it Gulf War, Gulf II? No, Pearl Harbor. So I said, since 1945, the United States has been fighting most of these wars that we've been involved in under the UN auspices, and that's why there's no victory. That's why we're still in North Korea, I should say South Korea. That's why we have troops with all over the world engaged in various missions that are under the UN guidelines. Vietnam was fought under a subdivision of the UN called the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. Victory was the last thing on the minds of that entity. And
that's right.
Thousands of Americans died. Many were permanently and mentally. Billions of dollars were spent, and now it's a communist third world hellhole. And so people have to realize that. And I kind of use this term, a conspiracy to keep people away from the Constitution. Now, anybody can get it. Anybody can read it. But when you watch a presidential debate, how often do they mention the Constitution? Very infrequently.
Right.
At least when Ron Paul was running for president, he made reference to the Constitution. The other people also looked at him like, what are you talking about? That's an obsolete thing. We don't do that stuff anymore. Well, of course we do. It's the law of the land.
That's right. And I also would point out that President Donald Trump mentions the Constitution, and I think that's one of the reasons why he's despised by what we might euphemistically call the Eastern Seaboard liberal establishment. Hal, when a young person starts to understand the Constitution, they start to look at events and the news a little bit differently. And I'll give two examples recently. Well, not that recently now, but there was congressional testimony, I think it was back when Obama was president, with regard to America's incursion into Libya. And Obama had, by executive order, authorized missiles flying into Libya. Which, of course, turned out to be a complete disaster for this country, not to mention for the entire region. And in the course of that testimony, the Secretary of Defense was asked by a congressman who authorized these military acts, and he said it was authorized by NATO. And the congressman said, well, first of all, the Constitution says that Article 1, Section 8, that you have to get a declaration of war and that Congress is to be at least consulted, if not voting on this. And he openly said, no, that's not the case. It's NATO that has the authority to issue this order. Mm-hmm. And the second example happened more here locally, and that was that after the Boston Marathon bombing, where two terrorists who had been admitted into the country as refugees and who were on welfare, and then they decided to kill Americans at a marathon, we had Congressman Stephen Lynch of South Boston ask the FBI to provide information about their involvement in it. And the FBI told him, no, we're not going to give it to you. Now, and by the way, the head of the FBI at that time was Bob Mueller. And, excuse me, but, the FBI is an agency that is under the auspices of both the executive branch through the Department of Justice and Congress. And if a congressman asks for information from any federal agency, that agency better cough up the information, or else they should be I think he should have been taken out in handcuffs. I mean, what is that? I mean, who has the authority? If our Congress can't get information from a federal agency, then doesn't that tell us everything we need to know about what's been euphemistically called the dark state? Who are they accountable to?
Well, I think what the issue with two Sarnoff brothers, I think there was a lot of, they didn't want people to know too much. In fact, what do we know after the fact? Who were the enablers? There were just two guys just woke up one day and said, hey, today I'm off work. Right. Let's go blow up some people at the marathon. Yeah, it sounds like a fun thing. Who enabled them? We know there was a mosque in Boston, the Boston Islamic Center. That's where they attended. That's where they were radicalized. And they got that mosque through the city of Boston at 10 cents to the dollar. If you're a real estate developer, you couldn't buy that property for what they got it for, a song. And so these officials at the city level, state level, enabled these people. And there's probably some federal involvement in enabling, and definitely the Democrat machine. And I'm sure if they were Republicans, it'd be the same story. Nevertheless, right. All we knew is two guys just woke up one day and put some low-tech explosives and killed a half a dozen people, wounded a whole bunch more, and shot I think it was an MIT security guard.
Right, of course. But the thing that particularly is galling to me is the fact that the FBI defied a direct request by a sitting congressman, an elected representative of the people of the actual district where this